Kioachiu Ryu school fell apart precisely because the senior disciple, Shujiro, refused to take part in the mutual slaughter among his brethren, choosing instead to flee the dojo in the dead of night. This act enraged the sect's elder, Gentosai, turning the remaining junior disciples into targets for a brutal purge. To uphold their so-called succession ritual, Gentosai launched a relentless manhunt. Since then, Iroha had been living incognito, wandering from place to place with a traveling acrobat troupe. Even when the troop leader lusted after her, she dared not resist in the slightest, forced to swallow her pride just to survive. That was until the day she unexpectedly ran into her former third senior brother. However, the news he brought was colder than a blade's edge. He told Iroha that over the years, both Kazugoro and Nanaya had been tracked down and killed by Gentosai. Iroha's true motive for entering the Kodoku tournament was actually to use the event to rally her surviving fellow disciples, joining forces to kill Gentosai and finally end the ruthless pursuit. Returning to the present. Early the next morning, Kyojin Tsuge revealed to the group his two-pronged plan for investigating Kodoku. First, they needed to capture a participant and hand them over to the police to see how the organizers would react. Second, they had to track down what happened to the bodies of the fallen samurai. He theorized that the organizers must be constantly monitoring the participants. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to dispose of the corpses so quickly after a kill. Therefore, by tracing the route used to transport the bodies, they might be able to expose the true mastermind behind the tournament. Meanwhile, the new Japanese government was also scrambling to deal with the Kodoku tournament. Toshiyoshi delivered the latest updates on the investigation. The heads of the four major zaibatsu, financial conglomerates, had gone on leave a week prior and were now entirely unaccounted for. Toshimichi Okubo was deeply concerned that the situation would escalate, potentially sparking civil unrest across the nation. The deep involvement of the four major zaibatsu, which controlled the country's economic lifeline, made any governmental countermeasure exceptionally difficult to execute. After a thorough investigation, they noticed a massive surge in domestic telegraph traffic ever since the tournament at Tenryuji began. Furthermore, these transmissions were concentrated in a specific area south of Mount Fuji, an uncharted location completely unmarked on the map. It wasn't long before the organizers' proxy caught wind of this, causing the hidden undercurrents of the situation to grow even more turbulent. The zaibatsu, however, were unconcerned about the government discovering their whereabouts, firmly believing they were under the protection of a guardian deity. Meanwhile, Shujiro and his companions arrived at the seaside town of Kuwana and promptly entered a bustling, noisy restaurant. They intended to pick a suitable target from the crowd to throw into jail as their test subject. They spotted a participant wearing a wooden tag, while Iroha recognized two other competitors in the room. Kyojin began to weigh which of the three they should hand over to the police. Little did they know, however, that they had walked straight into a trap. Before they could even finalize their target, every patron in the restaurant suddenly stood up and surrounded them. It turned out that Mustache had already laid an ambush, hiring a large gang of thugs, specifically to rob other participants of their wooden tags. However, these thugs had no idea they had just messed with the wrong people. With the exception of Futaba, the other three members of the group were highly dangerous, cold-blooded killers. Hoping to score a quick kill, one of the competitors decisively drew his sword, only for Kyojin to instantly subdue him with a lethal chokehold. In just a matter of minutes, the restaurant was left littered with corpses, with every single thug incapacitated or dead. The quartet eventually singled out 2 participants, giving them a stark choice: hand over their wooden tags and await assassination by the organizers, or quietly turn themselves into the police to buy some time. One of the participants confessed that he had never killed anyone in his life. He had only ended up there after picking up a wooden tag discarded by someone else. He claimed that he was only part of the ambush because he had been coerced by the thugs. Weeping bitterly, the man told Shujiro's group that he had only joined this twisted hunting game to help subsidize his father's struggling business.
それなのに殺し合いなんて僕には無理でした。お願いします。どうか命だけは。
Elsewhere, while en route to track down Shujiro, Bukotsu was constantly on the prowl for a worthy adversary. However, none of the fighters crossing his path were worth drawing his blade. It wasn't until he locked eyes with the archer, Kam, that his interest was finally piqued. Bukotsu had little respect for samurai who wielded bows, dismissing the weapon as lacking true lethal power. Kam countered that the bow was an instrument meant for offering sacrifices to the gods. When Bukotsu pressed Kam for Shujiro's whereabouts, he sharply sensed that the archer was holding something back. Without hesitation, Bukotsu drew his blade and struck down an innocent villager on the spot, using the murder to force Kam's hand. Disgusted by this senseless, unbridled bloodlust, Kam prepared to fight, and a clash between the two became inevitable. Using the panicked villagers as human shields, Bukotsu closed the distance, but Kam's archery proved both fierce and unorthodox. A curving arrow forced the swordsman to rapidly retreat. In a perilous split-second moment, Bukotsu callously grabbed a bystander to absorb Kam's fully drawn, lethal shot. Bukotsu's cunning maneuvers successfully dragged the fight into an even deadlier close-quarters phase. Just then, Sakura arrived with his squad and brought the skirmish to a halt. Given the heavy civilian casualties, the local security forces were already rushing to the scene. Sakura reminded them that they were both top-tier competitors, heavily favored by the Zaibatsu, making it entirely pointless to stir up trouble in a place like this. Sensing the presence of snipers lurking in the shadows, Bukotsu and Kam were forced to stand down. Sakura, who seemed intimately familiar with Bukotsu, remarked that times had changed. There was no longer a place for samurai in this world, and those who survived had endured unimaginable hardships just to stay alive. Meanwhile, Shujiro and his companions decided to split up. Kyojin stripped one of the captured participants of his wooden tag and sent him into the police station. Shujiro, utilizing a suspended animation technique, feigned death to lower his vitals and pass as a cold corpse. His goal was to see exactly where the organizers' cleanup crew would take him. Iroha and Futaba trailed closely behind in the shadows. At the police station, Kyojin noticed 2 conspicuously unusual officers walking inside. To uncover the truth, he disguised himself as an investigator and quietly tailed them. On the other side, Iroha and Futaba followed the corpse retrieval team, shocked to discover that Shujiro's body was being transported to a bank. Shujiro was dragged into the bank's interior vault, which was already piled high with the corpses of fallen competitors. Rising silently from the pile of bodies, Shujiro swiftly dispatched the room's guards and began searching for useful intelligence. Upon finding various regulatory documents and loan records bearing the name Mitsui Bank, he instantly realized where he was. Just as Iroha was preparing to move closer, she unexpectedly spotted Sakura, the same man who had instantly killed Ando at Tenryuji, entering the bank with 2 subordinates. Upon reaching the corpse holding room, Sakura immediately noticed that Shujiro's body was missing and quickly deduced that he had faked his death to infiltrate the facility.
Saga Kokushu.
天龍寺で安藤を切った姿を見て、もしやとは思った。
私も陰ながら応援していました。
お前はあの時死んだはずだ。
人生はわからないものですね。あなたはずっと私の憧れだった。
一つだけ教えてくれ。お前たちの目的は何だ？
お答えすることはできません。 旧知の2人が揃えば酒を酌み交わすか殺し合うか。
A brief exchange between the two men unearthed their shared past. They had once fought side by side as comrades in arms, yet now found themselves standing on opposite ends of the same conspiracy. Meanwhile, the participant sent to the police station was quickly silenced by the organizers, subsequently blowing Kyojin's cover. At the exact moment Toshiyoshi, the chief of the Metropolitan Police Department, arrived at the private quarters of the 4 major zaibatsu, the government independently discovered that the other source of the telegraph transmissions was the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department itself. As the pieces fell into place, the true nature of the tournament's organizers was finally laid bare.
電報の終着点は内務省警視局。
Toshiyoshi declared that a new, modern nation, built on the rule of law, had no need for relics of a bygone era, swordsmen obsessed with vigilante justice and personal vendettas. He believed that only by entirely purging these lingering ghosts of the past could the nation secure a stable future. Driven by a deep-seated hatred for samurai, Toshiyoshi was determined to end their era once and for all. He had traveled to Europe to study and directly imported their modern police system back to Japan. Now serving as the chief of police and backed by the 4 major zaibatsu, he was the mastermind who had conceptualized the twisted Kodoku game. Back in the bank and the prison cells, explosive battles involving Shujiro and Kyojin were on the verge of breaking out. It was revealed that Sakura had formerly been Shujiro's direct subordinate, having suffered severe injuries during the Boshin War a decade prior. Shujiro had presumed him dead, never imagining that his old friend had become an operative for this shadowy organization. Now divided by their conflicting ideologies, the 2 former brothers in arms were forced to draw their blades against one another. As the life-and-death duel between Shujiro and Sakura intensified, Kyojin found himself locked in a brutal struggle with police officials inside the jail. He masterfully used an opponent's body to block a shooter's line of sight, launching a swift counterattack the exact second the gunman's weapon clicked empty. Although Kyojin managed to drive his deadly spike into the side of an official's neck, the strike wasn't fatal. Seeing the shooter scramble to pick up another handgun to finish him off, Kyojin decisively abandoned close-quarters combat. Hurling his spike at the enemy to create an opening, he forcefully busted out of the cell and made his escape. Rather than attempting to break through the chaotic and heavily guarded main entrance, he nimbly scaled the stairs and leaped directly off the second-floor balcony. Meanwhile, Home Minister Toshimichi Okubo pulled a dust-covered photograph from the depths of his desk drawer, a group portrait of samurai taken before the establishment of the new government. 2 familiar faces among the group were none other than Shujiro and Sakura. Yet at that very moment, these 2 brothers in arms, who had once shed blood together, were locked in a bitter, claustrophobic deathmatch inside the bank. Sparks flew as blades clashed and gunshots rang out in their fierce exchange, the sheer force of their parries ultimately shattering their weapons. Just as Sakura prepared to deliver the killing blow, a smoke grenade rolled in through the window. Taking advantage of the blinding smokescreen, Shujiro made a swift escape under Iroha's covering fire. After the group reunited, Kyojin shared his conclusions based on their recent probing. The Kodoku samurai tournament was secretly orchestrated by the Metropolitan Police Department, heavily backed by the immense wealth of the zaibatsu. Though they hadn't fully unraveled the mastermind's true intentions, Shujiro and the others realized a grim truth. Even if 9 competitors successfully reached Tokyo, they would likely be forced to continue slaughtering one another until only one remained. Under such brutal rules, logic dictated that Futaba, seemingly the weakest of the group, should forfeit. Otherwise, she was walking towards certain death. However, she stubbornly insisted on seeing it through. Seeing their unshakable resolve, Kyojin suggested that Shujiro proactively reach out to high-ranking government officials to secure an alternative way out, bypassing the tournament's rigged system. Kyojin knew well that Shujiro had forged ties with powerful state figures during the war, and those connections were likely the only force capable of taking on the zaibatsu. The following day, Shujiro visited the telegraph office to send a dispatch. The moment he wrote down the recipient's name on the form, the clerk's face went pale with shock. The telegram was swiftly expedited to the director of the Intelligence Bureau, who promptly established contact with Shujiro. They struck a deal. Upon arriving in Tokyo, if Shujiro provided core intelligence regarding the Kodoku operation, the government would grant his group official asylum. The intelligence director subsequently reported the situation directly to Toshimichi Okubo. All evidence now pointed to Police Chief Toshiyoshi and the Zaibatsu colluding to orchestrate this bloody samurai tournament. Meanwhile, Shujiro's squad reached the Chiryu checkpoint, where they presented their accumulated wooden tags. However, Shinosuke, who had been trailing them, faced elimination due to an insufficient tag count. Entering such a competition as a grown man inherently meant accepting the risk of death, so Shujiro and Kyojin initially showed him no sympathy. But Futaba desperately pleaded on his behalf, wanting to spare some of their own tags to save his life. Moved by her persistence, the group ultimately decided to bail Shinosuke out.
結局は命を先延ばしにするだけです。佐山様の実力では生き残る可能性がある9名には入れません。
To their surprise, this act of mercy even drew a modicum of respect from Kunugi, the organizer's proxy at the checkpoint.
良き旅を。
Judging by Kunugi's words, they deduced that it might actually be possible for 9 participants to survive the final stage of the game. That meant they wouldn't have to slaughter one another. Shujiro believed it was likely Futaba's inherent kindness that had moved Kunugi to show compassion. Having felt like a burden to the team for so long, Futaba was deeply moved to finally receive everyone's validation. Even the usually reserved Iroha had grown quite fond of her kind and polite nature. Shortly after they arrived at a crossroad, Kyojin abruptly grabbed Shinosuke and pulled him aside, declaring that they would temporarily part ways with the main group. He claimed the earlier conflict at the police station had likely put them on a wanted list, making it necessary for them to lay low for a while before deciding on their next move. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. See you in the next video.